Okay, so we're diving into this lawsuit today. And it's got like 27 plaintiffs.
Wow.
And they're all religious groups.
Okay.
Which is interesting in itself,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
And it's everyone from like Episcopalians and Reform Jews to Mennonites and Unitarians.
Interesting.
All taking on the Trump administration over this new immigration policy.
I see.
And the thing that really caught my eye with this one is that it's not even just like the policy itself.
Right.
But it's like this whole idea of sanctuary that it brings up.
It's really fascinating how this case kind of brings up this concept of sanctuary, which is so deeply rooted in, various traditions. And the policy basically gives immigration agents more leeway to make arrests at houses of worship. And these groups are really pushing back, saying it infringes on their religious freedom.
So we're not even just talking about like immigration law here.
Right.
We're talking about like a potential clash between the government and how these diverse faiths like practice and protect their communities.
Exactly. And the lawsuit's really interesting because it points to this growing fear in immigrant communities.
Right.
People are really worried about attending services or even accessing, help because of this potential for arrest.
Oh, wow.
They cite a case in Atlanta where a Honduran man was arrested outside his family's church.
During a service.
During a service, yeah.
Oh, wow.
It really highlights the anxiety this policy is creating.
That must be so unsettling for those communities.
Absolutely.
So, like, how does the government even justify this policy if it's causing that widespread fear?
Yeah, so their argument is that it gives agents more discretion.
Okay.
Not necessarily leading to more arrests.
At religious institutions.
Right, at religious institutions.
Gotcha.
They claim concerns about widespread arrests are speculative.
Okay.
However, the religious groups are really pushing back hard.
Yeah.
Saying that it directly impacts their ability to minister.
To all members of their community?
Regardless of immigration status.
Regardless of immigration status, exactly.
Which makes sense when you think about it.
Right.
Because a lot of these organizations run food banks and shelters and things.
Absolutely.
That often serve undocumented immigrants.
Yeah.
But this whole concept of sanctuary being used here, I feel like it has deeper layers than just the legal arguments.
You're spot on. The term sanctuary is loaded.
Yeah.
Historically and religiously. Professor Kathleen Kavanagh, who's a scholar on religion and law, has a really interesting take on this. Okay. She compares churches to embassies belonging to an eternal country.
Embassies of an eternal country.
Yeah. It's a powerful image.
That's a powerful image. What do you make of that analogy?
It's a way of saying that these places operate under a different set of rules.
Right.
A higher authority.
Interesting.
They've been seen as these places of refuge.
Separate from the secular world and its laws.
Right.
Which, of course, brings up tons of questions about where the lines are drawn.
Totally complicates things. So we've got this policy sparking fear. We've got a diverse group of faiths invoking their right to religious freedom. And this concept of sanctuary being brought up all around this issue of immigration.
Right.
What's the administration even have to say
about
the religious freedom claims being made?
So the Justice Department issued this memo stating that houses of worship shouldn't become sanctuaries for illegal activity, echoing sentiments from conservative legal experts like Matt Staver. They argue that religious freedom shouldn't shield individuals from facing consequences for breaking the law.
Right.
So it's a clear counterpoint.
Yeah.
To the lawsuit's claims that this policy impedes their ability to minister to all.
So you've got this tension between upholding the law and respecting religious practices.
Exactly.
And it's not even just a theoretical debate, right?
No, it's not.
It's impacting real people and communities.
Absolutely.
This Bishop Sean Rowe from the Episcopal Church put it really strongly. He said, we cannot worship freely if some of us are living in fear.
That quote really gets to the heart of their argument, doesn't it?
Yeah.
It highlights how they view ministering to everyone, including undocumented immigrants, as inseparable from their faith.
Totally.
But it raises the question of whether the government sees it the same way.
It makes you wonder how much weight these religious freedom claims are actually going to carry in this legal battle.
Yeah.
Especially since, like you said, the government's arguing that concerns about widespread arrests are overblown.
Exactly. It all comes down to how the courts interpret this policy's impact on religious practice.
Yeah.
Is it a legitimate infringement on religious freedom, or is the government's claim of discretion enough to justify it?
Right.
And that brings us back to this complex concept of sanctuary and what it truly means in this context.
Yeah, because if churches are embassies of an eternal country,
Right,
as Professor Cavaney suggests, where does that leave the government's authority?
it's a big question.
And how do we as a society balance
Yeah.
those competing claims?
That's the real crux of it. We're not just talking about legal technicalities here.
Yeah.
We're talking about deeply held beliefs and fundamental principles.
Wow.
And that's what makes this case so fascinating.
Yeah, I can see that.
Yeah.
Absolutely. So it really does make you think, like,
Yeah.
if we take that embassy analogy seriously,
Right.
does it mean that traditional legal boundaries don't fully apply within those spaces?
It's a really interesting question.
Yeah.
It really challenges like how we usually think about the separation of church and state.
Right.
It certainly complicates things.
Yeah.
Historically, the idea of sanctuary has often been linked to offering refuge from persecution or even legal consequences.
Right.
But how that translates to a modern diverse society, that's a big question.
Especially when you consider, like, the range of faiths that are involved in this case.
Yeah.
We're not just talking about, like,
Right.
one denomination or, like, a single interpretation of sanctuary.
Exactly. It's a multifaceted concept.
Yeah.
And that diversity of perspectives, I think, is what makes this lawsuit so interesting. It forces us to consider how different religious traditions approach this balance between spiritual obligations and secular law.
Yeah, it's not just a theoretical debate either.
Wow.
The lawsuit actually describes how this fear is impacting real lives, right?
Yeah.
Keeping people from seeking essential services. They quote this pastor in Virginia, Reverend Carlos Malave, who talks about this climate of fear where people are afraid to even go to the store, let alone church.
It's really impacting their daily lives.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
So it's interesting. The U.S. Conference of Catholic Bishops, which represents the largest denomination in the country, didn't actually join this lawsuit.
Yeah.
Although they've been critical of Trump's immigration policies in the past. So their absence is definitely noteworthy.
I think so.
It kind of suggests there isn't like a unified front,
Yeah.
even within religious circles, on how to approach this.
Right.
It speaks to the complexity
Yeah.
and the nuance of balancing religious convictions with legal obligations.
Exactly.
It's a reminder that even within like a shared faith, there can be diverse interpretations and approaches to applying those beliefs.
Absolutely.
But stepping back from the specifically religious angle for a second,
Okay.
what about the legal concept of sanctuary?
Yeah.
Like, what does that actually mean in today's context?
That's a great question because the term gets thrown around a lot, but its legal definition is distinct from its historical or religious connotations.
Okay.
Legally, sanctuary policies typically refer to limits on local law enforcement's cooperation with federal immigration authorities.
So it's less about, like, physically offering refuge in a church or a temple.
Yeah.
And more about establishing boundaries
Exactly.
between local and federal law enforcement. And this case is challenging those boundaries, right?
Yes.
Essentially arguing that houses of worship should be considered sanctuary spaces.
Exactly, in that legal sense.
Yeah.
It's testing the limits of how far that concept extends.
Yeah.
And whether it can be applied to religious institutions in this way.
Right.
And it raises questions about how those legal boundaries intersect with ideas of religious freedom and the government's authority to enforce immigration law.
Right. It's like a fascinating legal puzzle.
It is.
But one with very real consequences.
Well, absolutely.
For the people involved.
Yeah.
The lawsuit really paints this picture of communities struggling to balance their faith,
Right.
their need for essential services, and the fear of potential legal repercussions.
And it forces us to confront
Yeah.
some uncomfortable truths about our society's priorities.
Right.
How do we as a nation weigh the importance of upholding the law against the moral imperative to protect vulnerable populations?
Especially when those vulnerable populations are often seeking refuge and support within their own communities and places of worship.
It's a situation where the lines between legal, moral, and religious obligations become incredibly blurred.
Absolutely. And this case really exposes those blurred lines.
Yeah.
Forcing us to grapple with some fundamental questions about justice,
Right.
compassion, and the role of religious institutions in a society grappling with complex issues like immigration. This whole conversation about sanctuary, whether in a legal or religious sense, really highlights the power of fear.
It does.
It's not just about the potential for arrest. It's about the chilling effect it has on entire communities, creating this climate of distrust and anxiety.
Fear can be a potent tool for social control, but it can also be a catalyst for change.
Right.
And in this case, it seems to be mobilizing these diverse religious groups to push back against what they see as an infringement on their fundamental rights and values.
But it's not just about winning a legal battle, is it?
No, I don't think so.
It's about challenging deeply ingrained societal attitudes towards immigration and redefining how we approach this balance between compassion and the rule of law.
It's a much larger conversation than just this specific lawsuit. It's about how we define our responsibilities to those seeking refuge and support, and how those responsibilities intersect with our legal system and our understanding of religious freedom.
This really makes you think about how this case could, impact the future relationship between religious institutions and the government. You know, we're seeing this pretty diverse coalition of faiths here, uniting against this policy they believe infringes on their core values.
It definitely sets a precedent for faith communities to, leverage their collective voice and challenge policies they see as unjust or harmful to their congregations. This case could embolden other religious groups to take a more active stance on social and political issues that align with their beliefs.
So what about the potential impact on immigration policy itself? Could this case force a reconsideration of how immigration enforcement intersects with religious freedom?
It's certainly possible, depending on the outcome. This case could prompt lawmakers to re-examine existing policies and consider ways to balance those enforcement goals with the protection of religious liberties. It might lead to more nuanced approaches that take into account the unique role religious institutions play in immigrant communities.
So this case isn't just a legal battle. It's like a potential turning point in how we approach these complex issues.
I think so.
As a society.
It really challenges us to think critically about the limits of government authority, the importance of religious freedom, and the moral implications of our immigration policies.
It also makes us ask some tough questions about our values and priorities.
Absolutely. And it challenges us to examine our own beliefs and consider how we can contribute to creating a more just and compassionate world.
And what about this broader concept of sanctuary?
I
mean, we've been focusing on houses of worship. But this idea extends beyond those walls.
It does. It absolutely does.
Where else do we see this tension between offering protection and upholding the law playing out in our society?
That's a crucial point, because the concept of sanctuary can be applied to a wide range of contexts, from schools and hospitals to cities and even entire nations. Think about the debates around providing health care to undocumented immigrants or offering refuge to those fleeing persecution in other countries. It's a much broader concept.
It seems like these questions about sanctuary and who deserves protection are becoming increasingly central to our national conversation.
I think so. And this case really drives that home. These aren't just abstract debates. They have real-world consequences for individuals and communities across the country.
So as we wrap up this deep dive, what are the key takeaways we should leave our listeners with?
I think this case really highlights the complex interplay between immigration policy, religious freedom, and the concept of sanctuary. It's a reminder that these issues are multifaceted and require careful consideration of the legal, moral, and social implications involved.
It also underscores the importance of engaging in these difficult conversations.
Absolutely.
Even when there are no easy answers.
Because ultimately how we choose to navigate these challenges will shape the kind of society we become.
Thanks for joining us on this deep dive. We hope this has given you some new insights. And encouraged you to keep exploring these crucial issues.